Hello, Michelle.
Hello, Jen.
Hey, friends, it's Jen from Pride and Grit. Happy you're here hanging out with us. I'm excited today because I'm loving this little series we're doing because I'm learning things and I love helping you all learn things as well. So we are going to talk with Michelle Crumley today from Caliber Home Loans, who is one of our amazing sponsors for the Evolve Retreat. And so we're really excited for Michelle to be here and be able to answer your questions. She and I have a few teed up things that, like, when she and I first talked, I was like, hey, these are all the things I want to know. So we'll talk about some of those, but then I want to make sure you guys bring in your questions as well. So throw those in the chat. If you're catching us on the replay, let us know. We would love to know that as well. And we'll get started. So Michelle, I will let you do kind of your own intro and tell folks your role at Caliber, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Well, it is so wonderful to be here today and so excited to hear how your very first retreat goes. This just sounds really exciting, and to be a little part of that is pretty amazing. So I am Michelle Crumley, and I am the military client and community liaison at Caliber, which I am absolutely passionate about and love to bring that to the community. So as a 30-year military veteran spouse myself,
Nice.
And now 19, almost 20 years in the mortgage industry, my passion is truly the education. I think it was probably the third house that I bought that I finally somewhat understood what was happening to me.
Right.
And didn't like the idea that others were going through that. So I've really taken my career and all the different facets, from originator to branch manager to performance coach of loan officers to a national trainer to Caliber to this role, so that I have the ability to bring and educate and just provide resources to our military community.
I love that. I love that story. And you're so right. Like, I think, homeownership it's exciting, but it can be a little scary, right? That's a really thick stack of papers they hand you and say, here, like, sign away your life forever, or for at least the next 30 years, right?
Yep.
So I think it can be daunting for a lot of folks. And I think for military in particular, in some cases, in certain geographies and with certain circumstances, it makes sense to pursue that. And so sometimes you're doing that maybe younger than your peers might have done it. I certainly owned, my first house, a little bit before I think my peer group was, and it was kind of scary to be kind of out on your own and figuring that out. So I love that there's folks like you behind the scenes making sure we all know what the heck we're doing.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we wanted to really focus on, I think, is, and we can, broaden it as the comments come in, but really just focusing on the VA loan in particular, because obviously that's the huge military benefit when it comes to homeownership. And I think it's through that mechanism that so many people are actually able to go down that road when maybe they wouldn't have, with a conventional. So talk to us a little bit about your perspective on that VA benefit, and just making sure we kind of understand, what are some of the things that people misunderstand about that VA benefit, and what would you want everyone to know from the beginning?
So the military, being in the military and or around it, we all know that while we're in the middle of it, we like to think, are they really taking care of us? But the VA did such an incredible thing when they opened up and created the VA loan product. I swear, I believe it is the absolute best loan program that is out there if you're eligible, right? And everybody that is on here likely is. And what a lot of people don't realize is you do not have to be a first-time home buyer to use it. You can have multiple properties that have that and use your VA over and over again. It's not a one-time use it or lose it. You don't have to be retired to use it. I've had that question come up before. Well, I'm saving it until I retire or I'm out of the military. So it is able to be used throughout your lifetime. There are some caveats to that that have to do with how many homes do you own? Do you have one now? Those kind of things. But it is a benefit that you have for the rest of your life when you are eligible for a VA loan. Okay. 100% financing, right? You don't have to make a down payment. Now, little misnomer with that is it doesn't mean that there is no costs whatsoever. There's still closing costs and escrows and some of these paperwork administrative components. that get paid at closing, but it's not on top of a down payment. So 100% financing is possible. And there's a lot of things that you can do to mitigate those costs that aren't covered in the loan. And it's for a primary owned home, so you can't use it for an investment property.
Right.
Kind of good to know there.
Yep.
But you hear a lot of misnomers out there. You can use it to buy a 1 to 4 unit home. So a lot of individuals will use it to start building their wealth. They'll buy a duplex or a fourplex, live in one side, and rent out the others.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's I've heard people do that. I just, it's one of those that feels overwhelming to me.
You got to be ready to be a landlord.
I know,
but
yes, for sure.
There are a lot of individuals that will look at that instead of at their first duty station or their second or their third duty station to buy a duplex, move into one side, rent it out. When they move to the next home or their next command, they'll rent both units, buy another duplex, and they'll build a lot of wealth doing that.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point, because you mentioned like you can't use it for rental property, but my and correct me if I'm wrong, right? My recollection is that it has to be as a primary residence initially. There's this sort of 1 year live-in requirement, but then after that, you don't have to refinance it or anything like that. You can keep it and carry it through as then a rental and investment property going forward.
Yep, sure can.
Okay. Yep. All right. So talk to us about you mentioned the retirement piece. I'm interested in the transitions. We have a lot of folks who are in that kind of latter third, if you will, last third of military life, and maybe starting to, really, truly dream about the forever home. Like my husband and I joke about it all the time. I have a folder somewhere in my email of like all the things we've, like, what about this? What about this? The forever house is like this thing I think that like keeps us going. It's the thing we can't wait for. But in terms of transition, one of the things I had asked you when we first spoke is because I'm starting to be in a lot of these transition spaces through Pride and Grit and through Evolve, I'd started to learn more about like the disability ratings and what that looks like. And I didn't fully understand the timing. Like I've heard people say, well, do you need to get the VA before you retire? Do you need to wait until after? How does that true transition period factor into that VA loan, or does it really not matter? And then why?
Great question. And I would bring two components into that. One, just about income. And then we're going to talk about the VA actual funding fee.
Perfect.
With income, when you're transitioning, understand that if there is a known separation date, then when you look at getting qualified for a loan, so let's say I'm in Virginia Beach, but we're going to buy our forever home in Arkansas, maybe have family there. I need to be able to show what our income is going to be in Arkansas, not what I'm making today, right? Because if I know I'm separating in 10 months or I'm separating in less than a year, because all the income that we use needs to be, for the most part, what they consider stable for the next 3 years. So if there is a known separation date, and papers are in and things are moving, to use income, it needs to be the income based on what you're going to be making where you live. So just a little component there. We can go back and dig into that if we need to a little bit.
Sure.
And the other component that I think that you and I were actually seriously talking about was that VA funding fee, right? So part of the way that VA is able to offer the VA loan is by a VA funding fee that everyone that uses the loan pays, unless you have a disability rating and are receiving disability from the military, in which point that VA funding fee is actually waived. Now, what happens when you're transitioning or right as you get out is that's not a short process.
Right.
So you might want to buy the house before you finish your rating and get everything all squared away. You can do that. You're just subject to the VA funding fee.
Right.
But the really cool thing
this is what I didn't know.
once your rating is in place and they make it retroactive to a time before you actually closed on the loan, not after, before. Okay. So it has to be before you would have closed on that loan. So they'd make it retro usually from the day that you put your claim in, right? They
Right.
make it retro to before you close. The VA will refund that VA funding fee after closing. So you
Interesting.
might have started the process, then you start buying the house, you close on the house, your VA rating comes through, your disability rating comes through 3 months later, and you're like, man, I just spent like $6,000 on a VA funding fee that got rolled into my loan. Now what?
Yeah.
Contact your lender.
Mm-hmm.
They will work with you and the VA to get the documents needed in, and to get that refund going for you.
Which is, I think, a really interesting, and maybe I'm the only person who didn't know this, but I've met a lot of people who retire at their last duty station, right? They either deliberately try to get placed there because that's where they want to retire, or they get there and love it and like, we're just going to stay. And so often they have bought a house, and maybe it was well before, this whole process started. So it's interesting that there is a mechanism to, allow them to still get that full benefit of not, if their rating fits that, which is sort of unfortunate, right? Like, this isn't something we're all hoping for, but if they have a rating, like, you have it, right? And if you have it, then you should be subject to all the benefits that come underneath
Yes.
that. And so this is just one way to make sure that you're kind of looking back and understanding that full process and that timeline. I think the income thing you mentioned is really interesting too, because the other thing I hear a lot is, we don't know where we want to go. We don't know where we want to go, right? Because sometimes the job, if a service member is intending to retire but intending to continue working, then it's really the job that's going to dictate where the movement, where that last duty station is. Mm-hmm. So if I'm understanding you correctly, that can cause a little bit of a wrinkle from a qualification standpoint, unless maybe the spouse works and you have that sort of stable income to support that loan application. Would that be accurate?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So, for example, right, if you're retiring, you know what your military retirement is going to be, and hopefully you have an idea of maybe what that VA disability is, or maybe it's in early, and so we already know that you're going to be receiving that. But either or, if you can qualify on your retirement, no problem. If you're going to need the income from the job you're going to have,
right,
then that's where some of those questions come in. What's the timing? What kind of job are you getting? Is it something that you've got some skills in that that there's a likelihood you're going to be successful at? So there's just some of those little things to be prepared for. I can't tell you the number of conversations with individuals, whether they are retiring, and in many cases, if they're just separating, they're 12 years in and they're separating, they're just not going to do, for whatever reason, a full 20. And they don't know that everything has to be based on the income that's going to happen, not what the income is right then.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And it's very similar to civilian, right? Like, if you don't have a job, like, qualifying for a house it's hard. And so it's kind of the same. It's sort of the same thing. You still have an income. It doesn't mean you couldn't qualify. It might change what you could qualify for.
Exactly.
And so then that's a decision that, the family has to make. So that's a really interesting point. So to that, like, from what you've seen, when does it make sense for people to say, what, VA is a great benefit. I appreciate that it's there. This time, this house, this whatever, it just isn't the right fit for us. Like, is that exclusively an interest rate decision? What are the other decisions that kind of go into where, which application to put in, if you will?
Absolutely. So as you are thinking about that, one is, do you have a down payment? If you can put 20% down and you have to pay a VA funding fee, and there's not that much of a rate difference between the two,
right,
then maybe I want to go conventional.
Okay.
If I don't have 20% to put down, I probably want, and it's a primary residence. It can't be a second home. The second home, I'm going to be thinking conventional. Investment, I'm going to be thinking conventional. So then it's a matter of that VA funding fee weighed against the interest rate and or down payment or lack thereof that you need to make.
Okay.
Or if you have a VA loan in use and you want to use your VA a second time, but you don't want to refinance the other property or sell it,
right?
Depending on how much eligibility that you may have would determine whether or not it made sense.
Yep. No, I remember that. There's I think, and it has to do with the zip code you're going to. There's a lot of factors that impact what that eligibility is. It's not a blanket amount, even based on your own finances. It is geography driven. There's a lot of other factors. So to that question, one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, just about, maybe not every lender, but I think just about every lender has the capability to do VA, correct? Mm-hmm. So what's the benefit in sort of aligning with a lender who has kind of a deeper knowledge and a deeper focus on the VA and on the military community?
And thank you for asking that, because there is a huge difference as someone that's out there educating our real estate agents as well as our active duty and veteran communities and their spouses. There's a huge difference. I could go out there and say, I can do VA loans. And they bring me a VA loan and it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know all of these little nuances. Mm-hmm. Some of the property inspection requirements that are a little bit different than conventional. Some of the income requirements that are a little bit different. Just being able to speak the lingo in many cases to understand how to read an LES. What does it mean? What's on it? So when you work with someone that doesn't just do a VA loan here and there, but truly is an expert and immersed in the VA loan and the military community, you get a vast difference in knowledge. So you avoid a lot of hiccups that can occur because you don't know that you have to use child care costs as a debt on a VA loan. Oh. You don't on any other loan.
Interesting.
And that will be a torpedo that can blow up a VA loan and process if your lender, your loan officer, doesn't know some of those little ins and outs. So I think that's a great question, is when you talk to lenders, part of that question to be asking them is, not only does your company do VA loans, mm-hmm. do you do them well? And how many have you done? What is your expertise? What is your knowledge? What is your customer experience that has occurred? You don't want someone that is transactional when it comes to VA. You want someone that is committed and knows the process and has done 100 or more loans at least with a VA.
Well, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing. You mentioned the word when you're asking questions. And I think, for me, like if I'm buying a house or selling a house, like interviewing realtors is a process that I think is really important. I've always put a lot of value in taking the time to interview and find the right fit for you and your situation. But I hadn't thought about it from a lender standpoint, but I think there's truth there too, right? Not all lenders are created equal. Not all lenders have the same process or experience, knowing whether your loan will immediately be sold off to someone else, like just things to know. I think we don't often think about sort of interviewing our lenders, but there's so many lenders that you kind of get to be in the driver's seat a little bit in that regard in terms of who you go to. So I think you make a really good point of just knowing what questions to ask so that, so you can ask them, and you can really kind of look at a couple different people and figure out what's the best fit for you. So let me just ask you, Liz had asked a question, and I think we know this, but I'm going to just clarify. So she was saying, so getting a house before you ETS is a good plan. I think the answer would be, it depends. But probably,
it depends. Yeah. Because one of the questions, right, when you actually go to qualify for a loan, right, and you say, I'm going to owner occupy this house, is okay. When you are PCSing, that's easy. There's orders that show where you're going and why. If I'm in Arkansas and I'm going to buy a house in Virginia Beach, but we don't have orders, how am I calling this a primary residence?
Right.
When am I going to be occupying it? And what is my income going to be if there's not an indication that I'm supposed to be there with the military? Right. So if there's some what ifs there.
Right? There's some ifs for sure.
And so if it is something that you are contemplating, reach out. Pick up the phone, whether it is a lender that you've worked with in the past that that knows VA, or if I'm doing a loan or if I'm not doing the loan, it doesn't make a bit of difference. It is about educating. Reach out to me. I'm happy to answer all of those questions and point you in the right direction.
I love that. Well, yeah, I'll be sure to drop your whatever information you want us to have. I'll be sure to drop it in here so folks would know how to find you. So I appreciate that. So Liz, if that didn't answer your question, come back to us. But I think the answer is it depends, which is, the reality is this is not, home buying is not simple. I mean, it is, there's just a lot of nuances to it. And so really, to your point, working with someone who understands the nuances matters. I think I was just going to look at my questions I had, but I think we've kind of hit them all. So let me ask you as kind of a closing question, what's the one thing that, and for anyone just joining us, we are talking with Michelle Crumley from Caliber Home Loans about really anything home loan, but we were specifically talking a lot about VAs. So what is, from your perspective, having done this for so long, what are kind of the top two things that people just either have wrong or misunderstand or don't consider when they're going down this, home ownership route?
The first being, it is important to find someone that knows mortgage. Find that lender, take a little bit of time, talk to them. Maybe even if you want to go far enough where you're actually getting some, referral information from others about that person, just so you know that you're talking with someone that knows what they're doing. The horror situations that you hear, we didn't close on time. The mover was, had the truck in the driveway and we were in a hotel. Most of that has to do with lack of communication. So make sure that you're working with someone that communicates well, clearly, and has a communication plan. And you want to make sure that you're working with someone that knows those nuances so that they don't run into those last minute hiccups. Those two things, I think, in general, will save you a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
Those horror stories are just horrible. Things happen, right?
Sure.
It's a transaction with a lot of moving pieces. Things happen during the process, but if you have someone that can communicate, explain the what, whys, hows, and what the next steps are, it is so much easier and smoother than someone that isn't available, doesn't know the answers, or isn't willing to jump in and help.
Right. No, that's really good advice, because it is not, especially if it's the first time you've done it, right? You don't know what you don't know. And so I think if you're a first time home buyer, you're relying on the people that are part of this team, right? You're relying on your realtor, you're relying on your loan officer to really help walk you through this path. And if you don't have folks that communicate well, it just adds frustration to what can be a stressful process. So I think those are, if those are two things you could get right in this process, I would say those are two really important ones.
Yep.
For sure.
Agreed.
Yay. Any other closing pieces of wisdom that we didn't touch on?
Buying a home is so exciting, whether it's your first home or whether it is your 18th home. You're going to have some nerves about it. And your lender's job is not to make the focus on the loan, but to give you the breathing room to be excited about the house.
I like it. Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you hanging out with us and answering questions. And we will drop Michelle's information in after this so that you guys can reach out if you need to. Yep. And that's that. That's a wrap. This was fun.
Outstanding. Thanks again so much. And guys, have a wonderful retreat as well. That's very exciting.
Thank you. We, as I said at the beginning, but for folks who joined late, we really appreciate Caliber's support of this event and just, their willingness to jump in. They are the presenting sponsor for Shauna Springer's talk on marriage and transition, which of course I think it's going to be really impactful for the attendees. So we're really grateful to everything Caliber's doing to help make this possible. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Yep. All right, guys, that's it for today. We appreciate you being here, and we will catch you in the next